Morning everyone. Today we're going to make some blackberry jam. So first thing you need to do is you need to get out your black raspberries. I have some saved here that I put in the freezer. For this recipe we're going to use about 1.5 cups of sugar, and in my recipes I always use what's called sucanat, which is basically just dehydrated cane juice, but you can use any kind of sugar, doesn't matter. I'm currently filling up about a 1 cup measuring cup with black raspberries. And I overfill it because they're frozen and you can't smash them very well. So I'm supposed to have just 1 cup, but because I can't smash them, I'm just kind of like adding extra to make up for that. You can see on your left here that I have a pot of boiling water all ready to go, and that's going to be for the jars once they're finished. Okay, so we got 1 cup. And the recipe I'm following is from Pomona's Pectin, and I believe that calls for 4 cups crushed fruit. And with my recipes I usually double them, so we're going to end up using 8 cups of crushed fruit here. And while I'm doing that, let's talk about the fruit that you have in your backyard. So if you have planted any kind of raspberries or soft fruits as they're called, you'll know that in the first year you're going to get a little bit of fruit, in the second year you're going to get a lot, in the third year you're probably going to get way too much. And then at that point the question becomes, well, what do I do with all of it? And there's plenty of things you can do. One of the things we're doing today is making jam. But there's other things as well. There's fruit leather, there's wine. You can make freezer jam. You could just throw them in the freezer just like I have them here. That's another option. I've had this recipe in particular last 2 to 3 years usually, but it usually doesn't last long enough in the pantry for it to get that far. I usually eat them before that happens. The jam recipe I'm using today is going to be low sugar, and usually jam recipes call for, like, let's say 4 cups of fruit and 4 cups of sugar. That would be a normal jam recipe, and it's just way too much sugar for me. So what we're going to be using is a low sugar jam, and it relies on pectin that gels through a calcium reaction. This is known as low methoxyl pectin. You may have seen it in the stores. One of the brand names for this is Pomona's Pectin, but be warned though that for some reason the low methoxyl pectin, doesn't seem to be the same regardless of where you buy it. I've purchased some before that for some reason I cannot get to gel, and even if I use 3 times as much as I usually would. So just be careful when you're buying it and buy good stuff. Pectin isn't strictly necessary for all types of jam. Certain fruits have enough natural pectin in them that they'll gel on their own just by cooking them. Currants are a really good example of this. If you cook them down, let's say 20 or 30 minutes, maybe a little bit longer than that, they usually will gel on their own. Same thing with apples. Well, some apples, more of like the ones that are greener, they have more pectin in them and they will usually gel themselves. You can also harvest your own pectin if you want. If you have a fruit tree like a quince, that has tons of pectin in it. So you can see here now that I filled up the 1.5 cups with sugar. I've got the black raspberries on the stove. They're starting to thaw. And in the background, I have my water boiling. I'm checking to make sure everything's good with that. And I'm taking out my previous jars that I was working on. I made some red raspberry jam before I made this black raspberry jam. So a little bit out of order here. That's the end result. And we're going to go through the whole process again from the beginning so you can see what happens. All these jars that I'm using today are from Weck, and you can purchase them from weckjars.com. I'm not affiliated with them, but I have been using them for many years. I found them to be really good jars. They don't fail all that often. I've had maybe a handful of them fail out of like hundreds of times I've canned. They have rubber seals and they have glass lids, so you don't have to worry about any kind of toxicity from the films that are on the other jars. I've been trying to avoid that. They're also reusable. The lid's completely reusable because they're glass, and the rubber's reusable as well. So some of the rubber seals I've used 3-4 times before they get kind of too stretched out and you have to replace them. Okay, so here's the pectin I'm using. Again, it's Pomona's pectin. I'm using a double batch. And the recipe calls for just kind of mixing in the pectin with the sugar. And the reason for that is because once you get your berries all heated up and boiling, if you throw the pectin in one big clump, that's what you're going to end up with. One big clump in the center. And it can be a pain to break that up. So the idea is kind of you mix it in with the sugar and you kind of like pour it in slowly while you're whisking, and you shouldn't have as many clumps, or ideally none. So you're going to see me mix this in carefully because the pectin is super dry and it likes to just kind of like blow away. So try not to breathe on it or anything because it's pretty dusty. So here we go. I've got it kind of settled in. It's mixed. It's not super thoroughly mixed. You can probably do a much better job than that, but for my purposes, it doesn't really matter. So while we're waiting for the black raspberries to kind of thaw out and melt, I'm going to get a couple other things ready. The first thing is that this pectin gels through a calcium reaction. So I have set aside in the refrigerator a small container, like a half cup of calcium water it's called, which is just pure calcium powder mixed with some fresh water. And this recipe calls for about, I think, 2 tablespoons of that. Yeah, so 1, 2. Oh, that's right, I'm doing double recipes, so 3, 4. So even if your fruit doesn't have enough calcium in it to get it to gel, this should make up for that. So now we've got everything pretty much set up. We've got our sugar and our pectin set up, mixed together, ready to go. We've got our fruit measured out and slowly thawing. Try not to, use too much heat too quickly because it's easy to burn the fruit on the bottom, and it doesn't boil like water does, so it can be easy to, not get it to mix well enough and just have this like seared on layer at the bottom. So be careful with that. And we've also mixed in our calcium water so that we have plenty of calcium for this pectin to gel correctly. So now basically the process is just smash the fruit up, heat it up to the point where it's boiling, and then mix in the pectin. Pretty straightforward. Okay, we're just about ready to go now. The jam, the fruit is the fruit is well smashed, pretty much near boiling. You got to get it to boiling before you mix in the pectin because it needs a lot of heat to gel. So in a second here, you're going to see me mix it in, and you're going to have to vigorously stir it or vigorously whisk it for about a minute before it's ready to go. So here we go. I'm going to turn up the heat. I'm going to make sure the last little bits are smashed. I'm going to check to make sure that it really is boiling, or that it's boiling vigorously enough. And then we're going to stir the sugar in. Well, whisk it. All right, here we go. So pour slowly, whisk fast. You can see some of the pectin is coming off. That's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just whisk as quickly as possible and make sure you keep going for, the directions say a minute. I've found probably 30 seconds is usually good enough, but if you can do a minute, that's fine too. So keep going. Make sure you whisk down the sides because the pectin likes to get stuck on the edges, and then you end up with these clumps in your jam, which is not all that tasty. Keep going, keep going, keep going. You're almost done. And then once you finish with this, you can take it off the heat and scoop it into the containers. All right, so we're coming up on time here. Yep, good to go. So you can see now everything's whisked together pretty nicely. Kind of scrape down the sides a bit, take it off the heat. And then you're done with the whisk, so you can put that in the sink. All right, so next up is you've got your clean jars. The weck jars actually don't have to be boiled beforehand, unlike I think ball jars, which do have to be boiled beforehand. That step I've never seen that in any instructions for weck. So, you know, your mileage may vary as far as how long your fruit jam lasts, but I've never had any problems not boiling the jars. So if you want to omit that step, I certainly find it to be a pain. Feel free. So this step is basically, I have a filling funnel for the jars. That same thing came from weck. Just be careful now when you're scooping this stuff into the jars. It can be, it is extremely hot, and it's hard to get the jam off of your skin if it sticks to you. So just be super careful. I've gotten burned quite a few times. The other thing to remember is that you need a lot of headroom at the top of the jars. Headroom or headspace is a small, let's say, I think it's like a 1/2 inch or something that you leave at the top. And the purpose of that is when you put the jars into the boiling water, the jam is going to expand a little bit more through, I guess, steam getting created or whatever. You know, warm things expand. It's just basic physics. And if they don't have enough room to expand, it will squeeze out through the top, and you're going to end up with jam in your water, and your seals are not going to seal. So I think I ended up with 3 jars out of this. So in the background here, my wife is actually boiling the lids, or not, sorry, not the lids, the rubber bands. So WEC, the only thing you do need to prepare ahead of time is to make a small pot of boiling water and boil the rings and leave them in the boiling water until you're ready to use them. Also, a spatula is really handy because jam is quite sticky. Alright, so these jars have plenty of headroom and they shouldn't have any problems. If you're canning something like, I don't know, applesauce or something that you have tons of and you want to try and squeeze it in as tight as you can, again, just be mindful of the amount of headroom you're going to need. I have had jars explode before, not explode like break, but explode in that the jam has been squeezed out of the top and they definitely won't seal like that. So, you know, all is not lost if that happens. You can still, you know, take it out, cool it down, and then put it in the refrigerator and use it right away. So it's not like it's going bad, but you are going to have to use it a heck of a lot faster than you would something that was properly sealed. Also, I realized with this recipe, since I had used frozen fruit, that I ended up with not enough fruit for 3 jars. And here is me just kind of doing a little bit more fruit because I need more fruit in that last jar to get it to sink. So that's another problem that you'll notice if you've done any amount of canning, is that you know, you need headroom at the top, and you also need the jars to be heavy enough to sink when you put them in the boiling water. And if they don't, they'll flip upside down, and again, you run the risk of them either cracking or, you know, exploding or just not sealing correctly. So this process is going to take a few minutes. I'm just going to, you know, heat up some more black raspberries real quick. Just smash them real quickly and then just throw them in the top. All right, fast forward to 25 minutes and 48 seconds. Okay, so now that the rest of the black raspberries are smashed up, we're just gonna throw them in the top. And now we have plenty of weight to keep the jar, you know, firmly against the bottom of the pot. Another thing to keep in mind when you're doing a boiling water canning like I'm doing here, the water needs to be about at least, I think, an inch above the top of the jars. So be mindful of that, in that if you only have water just a little bit above the jars, they're not going to seal. You don't have to go crazy. They don't have to be like, you know, 6 inches under. Just, you know, 1 inch is good. Let's scrape up the last little bit, put it in the jars. Try to get them relatively even. You don't have to. It's just my own thing that I like to do. All right, so we're done with the pot. I think we're done with the whisk. All of that stuff can go in the sink. Now it's time for the water boiling part. So I've got my rings that I've prepared ahead of time, sort of. Got my rings that I've prepared. They're in the boiling water. All you need to do is basically get like a fork or something, scoop them out one by one. Be careful because they are quite hot, and put the clips on your jars. Another thing that I've noticed with the WEC jars is that it's a good idea to kind of like wipe down the lids, because over time, if you have hard water, they tend to like build up a film around them, and the film prevents them from sealing. So you've got to be kind of careful with this step, in that you want to make sure the ring is, you know, the rubber ring is properly spaced all around, it's not bunched up anywhere, and that you've got the rings, or you've got the clips 180 degrees spaced from one another. So, you know, three 3 and 9 or 6 and 12 or however you want to think about it. I'm also wiping down the rings because I've noticed in the past that I've had some fail because there was a bit of water that squeezed up into the ring, and then because of that there was some steam that never went away and the seal failed. You know, not immediately, sometimes immediately, but sometimes within like a month or two, which is not what you want. You want this to stick around for, you know, ideally at least a year. So weck jars are pretty easy to tell if everything went correctly. They have a little tab on the front, as you can see. I'm facing that outwards. The little tab, once it's been sealed, will point downwards. And if it's pointing down, it's sealed. If any kind of bacteria starts to grow in there and, you know, becomes a problem and it starts to multiply, you'll have some gas that gets created in there. The seal breaks, and then the tab will basically won't be pointing down anymore. It'll be perpendicular to the ground. It'll just be straight out. And you'll know when you're pulling it off. It won't have any, you know, resistance to unsealing, and the jam is no good, unfortunately. I've had a few of them go bad over the years, but really not that many. Not as many as you think. And if I'm doing large batches, every once in a while, like every 10th one, I might have one that didn't seal properly in the beginning, and then I usually have them last at least a year, sometimes 2 or 3, if I did a really good job. And usually by year 3, they're kind of like losing their color, so I don't really want to eat that jam anyway. I mean, the whole value of doing this is that you're offsetting things that you would normally have to purchase at the store. You're getting fruit that is at the peak of ripeness, and you're saving lots of money. So here I am setting a timer for about, I think I set 12 minutes, might be 10. It's definitely, you have to boil them at least 10 minutes, but you need to get the water back up to boiling first before you start your timer for 10 minutes. So keep that in mind. So yeah, like I was saying, you're saving lots of money doing this, and you're getting things at the peak of ripeness. Often when things are available to you at the store, berries or, you know, any kind of fruit, they've been picked kind of underripe, so they'll ship, or they can be handled or something like that, because you don't want to buy a quart of just smashed up berries. You know, they'll go bad immediately. So I think most farmers will pick things slightly underripe, so they're a little bit more firm, and then you can get them to last a couple days in the fridge or on the table or whatever you want to do with them. But if things are in your backyard, you can wait until the moment before they're about to, you know, melt. They're at their peak of freshness, ripeness, sweetness, everything. Color, antioxidants, everything in there. You pick it just in that moment. You jam them a few hours later, or, you know, even a week or two later if you froze them, and you've got the best jam you can possibly get. It's just that simple. Fast forward to 33 minutes and 36 seconds. Okay, our 10 minutes are up. Let's turn off the timer and turn off the boiling water. Let's get everything out. Okay, so the jars have been under for at least 10 minutes at a full rolling boil. They've been under at least 1 inch of water, so they should be pressurized. Just be super careful when you're bringing them out at this point. It's really easy to accidentally nudge them and pop the seal. So I've done that a bunch of times. Just be careful. I ended up buying this this jar handler from Weck just because it's really hard to use the ball jar handler to get the Weck jars out, which are wider. So this jar puller, or whatever they call it, is exactly the right size for Weck. So again, be careful when you're pulling them out. They're super hot. They're easy to bust the seal on accidentally. And just wait at this point until they're cooled off completely. Don't touch them, don't wipe them, just leave them alone, and you're good to go. You've got your own jam. Congratulations.